Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Fantastic. First of all, I would like to invite you to come forward. There are lots of spaces in the front row, and we are getting more people coming later. So, if you'd like to, then come forward to these spaces here. You'd be most welcome. Any takers? I warn you, I do pick on people if they don't volunteer. But, okay, I'd like to see some more people at the front. So thank you. Okay, let me introduce myself first of all. My name is Darlim, and I'm Events Director for ISACA London Chapter. This is, of course, an ISACA London Chapter event, but we are very grateful to our hosts, KPMG, for this marvelous venue and for the facilities that surround it. Particularly, I would like to mention Lynn Lawton, who is a lady sitting over there, who is a director at KPMG and has been our primary sponsor for this event. There is another who you've already seen, which is Gabrielle, who has been registering you at the desk, but she's stuck to her duty and she's going to steadfastly keep on encouraging people to come in here. So Lynn and Gabrielle, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is just to tell you the format of this event, give you a sneak peek at some of the things that are coming up in the next few weeks, and then hand over to our key presenter who will introduce the others. So, as far as today is concerned, this is what we have for you. The speakers, as it says there, are led by Andrew Shefford. And Andrew is sitting here in the front row, rather worryingly, still scribbling away on his slides. But if I give him an extra 2 minutes, I'm sure everything will be perfect. Andrew is going to speak on the topic that it mentions, technological change, trends and technology. Don't ask me to be a newscaster. Technology trend. I still can't do it. Can you read? Great. The trends and the enablers for effective governance. That's what I know it as. That will be followed by Anel, who will speak about implementing a control framework. And it's somewhat due to my forcing the issue that I've said, how about COBIT? How about COBIT? After I said it the 7th time to Andrew, he said, okay, we'll include COBIT. So COBIT is in there as well. But let me just ask you, who is using COBIT in their organization? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Okay, fine. Andrew, so that's the score. I have good news and bad news. COBIT 5 is the current version, of course, but COBIT 2019 has just been announced as well. So I suspect we'll be seeing lots more about COBIT as an enabler for various things in the next few months. Anel will be followed by Sarah, who is talking about data analytics. And then Andrew, I think, will probably wrap up that session and hand back to me, and I'll show you the slides about the next events. Andrew, that's actually fine for now, if you'd like to take over, yeah?
I will take over, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Shefford.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to KPMG this evening. As announced, I'm Andrew Shefford. I lead IT internal audit for KPMG in the UK. And, hey, it works. We'll come back to those in a little minute. In a minute or two. Okay, there we go. So that's me, and I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening to this ISACA event. And particularly grateful for people edging forward that little bit, because this is much more of an interactive session than I think the typical ISACA London chapter events have been in the past. Okay, so the reason that we've asked you to move forward is that there are some questions on the table After the 2 breakout presentations, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, we'll be answering those questions as a peer group on the table. We have flip charts, so you'll be able to capture your thinking. And so, maybe a little bit different, but hopefully it will be enjoyable. And hopefully we'll all take away something slightly different from this evening. Is it okay to be interactive this evening? Is that all right with everybody? Okay, a few nodding heads. So as an experiment then, not everybody in the room is an IT auditor, I'm guessing. Well, I know that because I've talked to quite a few of you, right? So what would be helpful is I'm going to read out 4 categories of job, and we'll try and understand the type, the people in the room, what sort of job that you have. Does that make sense? We'll do this by a show of hands. We're not going to use voting buttons because I'm not organised enough for that kind of stuff. So the 4 job titles are IT internal auditor, risk and compliance professional, and IT professional. So pick one, preferably not several, because otherwise this whole adding up thing is going to be a struggle. And my colleague Alex, who I can't see at the moment, is going to make an attempt at adding. Where's Alex gone? Oh, there you are, okay. All right, so those are the 4 categories: IT internal auditor, risk and compliance professional, or IT professional. So first of all, IT internal auditor.
What about cyber?
That will be, I would call that risk and compliance professional in the second line. What do you think? Would that be okay for now, for this evening? Have you? Can I put my hand down? Okay, all right, thank you very much. Next category, internal auditor. So non-IT internal auditor. Oh, wow, 2. Okay, thank you for owning up. The next one, risk and compliance professional. Wow. Including Lynn, of course, who is my risk person, who tells me what I can and can't do. All right, thank you, done. And then finally, IT professional. IT professional. Although cyber could be one of those, you can't have 2, you've had one. And any other IT professionals who haven't claimed to be something else? 4 or so, 5 people, something like that. Okay. All right, so the bulk of people are either IT auditors or IT risk and compliance folk, which I guess is what we would expect from a group of ISACA people. Okay, well done on the interactivity. We'll do quite a lot more of that a little bit later on. So I'm going to talk for a little while about, and I've got a little video to show about emerging technology risk and what we're seeing. And then I've got 2 of my colleagues who are going to speak. So first of all, Anel will speak. That's Anel over there. Anel has helped a number of organisations implement an IT control framework using COBIT 5. Okay, so she's going to talk a little bit about that and give you some perspectives and what we've seen, some of the learnings we've had. And then we've got some questions on the table. We'll form groups on tables to discuss that. Secondly, Sarah, who is also over there, hiding at the back. Sarah's one of our data analytics specialists, and Sarah's going to be focusing on a couple of things, really. One, you're fine sat there, really. It's fine. No, you're fine. I won't be coming back. Not ever. I mean, unless I get... No, move on. Real-time analytics, or near real-time analytics and process mining, as it relates to IT risk and control. Okay, so we think those will be useful things. There are questions on the back to focus on in your groups. And what we'll do is when you've discussed them in groups, we'll draw some threads together from some of the tables. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, I think they're both going to be really interesting. And once we've discussed around the tables, we can sort of draw some conclusions together as a group. I think I have the approval of the ISACA London chapter board on that. Including Daleen. Where's Daleen gone? Where's he gone? Oh, he's gone. He's coming back. Okay, all right, we'll talk about him in a minute when he's here. There's a video this evening. I don't know whether you sort of clocked that on the way in, but the video is pointing right at me, which is frankly a little bit disconcerting. So if there's more videoing, as we do those breakouts, I think the idea is that the video is not focused on the individual tables, which will be a relief, I'm sure, for some of you who have claimed to be out drinking with your friends, but have actually snuck out to an ISACA event this evening. Anyway, I'll wrap up then. Dalim's got a few more words to say, and then we can go for a beer. Although I'm not sure whether Dalim will be joining us for a beer later on, because I believe it's your wife's birthday this evening.
It is indeed my wife's birthday, but I've had to compensate by taking her away last night and just got back to London in order to be able to come here now. So that part of it's done, and I will be around for the rest of the evening. What I will do is show you the slides about the next events coming up at the end, after Andrew and colleagues have given you all their wonderful information. So,
right, thanks, Dalim. Okay, so a few things about technology change, really. I mean, I mean, preaching to the converted to an extent, but as you probably know, the World Economic Forum have talked a lot about technological change as a mega trend, and we're seeing trends like sector convergence, increased competition, a much faster innovation cycle, and disruption being the new world that we live in. And these disruptive technologies like AI and robotics and augmented reality, the Internet of Things, blockchain, who's seeing these things in their organisations currently? Or is it still just hot air? Okay, so we've probably got about 20-30% of, and consistent with the people that I spoke with 2 weeks ago at the ISACA UK and Ireland chapter meeting. So that was good. Well remembered, those people that were there at the time. Yeah, we're seeing those risks come to the fore, and of course cybersecurity, the perennial cybersecurity. So this is a slide that we use reasonably often with our clients, and it's a relatively simple enterprise risk management tool. Right? There's no great science behind this. You can argue that any of these risks could be in a different quadrant, but what we've done is we've taken typical IT risks and vulnerabilities, and we've got the stable and the known business on the left, and towards the right, the changing business. And then the y-axis is at the top, it's the external locus of control, and towards the bottom, the internal locus of control. I speak from this stage reasonably often, right? And these screens are always here. These screens have got what's on there, but I can't help doing this, as if I don't quite believe it. So I'll try and remember to look here so for the video, apart from anything else. Okay, so you can see how the framework works. So left to right, changing versus the stable business, and top to bottom, the locus of control. What we typically find, and I'm sure you find this as well in your organisations, is that audit committees and boards and C-suite people tend to worry about stuff above the line and to the right of the line. The sexy stuff, things like cybersecurity, things like, I was going to say vendor management, but that probably doesn't classify as sexy, does it? Things like the Internet of Things and distributed ledger or blockchain, quantum computing, some of these exciting things. But this foundational stuff in the bottom left-hand corner is so important. And if we don't make sure that we maintain our risk and compliance focus in that area, then it's foundational for everything else, and other things will go wrong. For example, it's much safer to connect sensors or devices or your operational technology environment, if you're in a manufacturing environment, for example, to your network, if you know that there's a decent IT control environment wrapped around it. So emerging technology is having a huge impact today and for the future, and I think we all know this. So I'm going to show you a video now of that's right, Alex, right? Yeah, okay. point is we need to, as IT audit and IT compliance professionals, we need to engage the business in this stuff. We need to not just engage IT, but engage the business in these risks and help them navigate this successfully. This stuff's coming at us very quickly, particularly artificial intelligence and robotics. And without getting the controls in place to begin with, it will pretty soon become too late. So, technology is enabling governance, risk and assurance transformation. We leverage access to big data and the enabling analytics, robotics and machine learning technologies around that. And that kind of technology is increasingly within our grasp. So given that as a backdrop, we're nearly there, right? Given that as a backdrop, as I said earlier on when we looked at this slide, if we don't get the bottom left-hand corner right, if we don't get our IT risk and control framework right, then we're going to have some challenges. So I'd like to invite Anel to join me up the front now. So the reason I've not tried to use Anel's surname is because I can't pronounce it. She's only worked for me for 4 years, so early days.
It's about time you learned it.
About time I learned it, yeah, you're probably right.
Do you want to unlock that?
Hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yeah. So my name is Anel. My last name is Haydar Galiva. That's how you say it, in case you were wondering. I'm going to present today. I work at KPMG here, and I specialize in IT control frameworks. So today, I'm just going to touch on some examples from my experience implementing COVID-5 control frameworks within different organizations. Okay? Is everyone happy with that? I saw some hands that Dalim asked you to say whether you've worked with COVID or not. I think it was just under 5%. So I will provide a brief introduction to what COVID is. Sorry, just going back to agenda, I will speak about methodology, what we've done for some clients, what worked well, what didn't, what else were the ways of working with internal audit, risk and compliance, different parts of organizations, how the business adapted, what went well, how did they monitor it once the framework was implemented, and then some accelerators and obstacles on the way. So COVID-5, so now this is COVID-5. I do know COVID 2019 went out 10 days ago. I will make some reference to it, but this session will be about COVID-5, just to make sure that everyone is clear. You can see on the screen is the process reference model from COVID. COVID-5 is a globally recognized framework that helps organizations make the best use of their information and technology by providing management and governance framework to support business needs for the whole of enterprise of IT. Simply put, that is framework that enables your IT to be managed and governed to support the business needs for the entire organization. Okay. Now on the screen, you can see the process reference model. There are 5 pillars that the process reference model consists of, which are, you can see, evaluate, direct, and monitor on the top. That's the overall direction for the framework, monitoring, making sure the risk is optimized. So you would see areas such as ensuring benefits delivery are part of that. And then you have align, plan, and organize, where you plan for the resources, for example. Manage strategy is a part of that as well. Now, this diagram is taken from COVID-5 framework. Build, acquire, and implement is when you actually acquire those IT assets, so your laptops, for example, or even set up the processes. And then evaluate, support, deliver service and support is when you're actually making sure these assets are supported throughout the operation. And then, of course, referring back to the section on the right is monitor, evaluate, and assess, making sure there is ongoing monitoring for your processes. Now, again, going back to this slide, this is COVID-5. COVID 2019 came out 10 days ago. I've added these blue blocks on there, so you can see the processes now went from 37 to 40. So there's another one being added under Align, Plan and Organize, Manage Data. We all know data and GDPR is now a big part of everyone's organization's strategy. And then we have managed projects and managed assurance. And overall, some other differences such as focusing on making focus areas, but also building in design factors. Implementation of that will be released later in December, so I'm sure you will get the information for that as well. Now, once we've understood COBIT, how do we start? Where do we start with? What do organizations want to achieve with COBIT? If the business decided to adopt COBIT 5 framework, it's important to decide what's the prioritization strategy that you want to follow. As you all know, COBIT is that big, 37 processes for COBIT 5, and then you only have that many resources and strategic options to focus on. So you want to decide for your organization what are the prioritization points that you want to focus on. Taking out non-required processes, non-required activities, anything that's outside of the scope for your piece of work. Or for example, some of the activities may be covered under different initiatives that are going on with your business. So for example, there is already a GDPR compliance project or SOC project that you want to link it back. So you don't want to duplicate the effort. So making sure you prioritize and select the processes that you want to focus on. So for example, for one of the projects that I had before with a retail client, we've decided that we want to focus on 14 areas that will be running in 2 tranches. So tranche 1 would be priority 1, anything that needs to be done this year, and then priority 2 would be anything that needs to be done but can be done later. And of course, all these processes are there for a reason, so it's not, you cannot ignore them, but as long as you rationalize why the rest of them are excluded from your scope, whether that's linked by a different program or will be looked at after, or it's not relevant for your business because you do X and Y. And then some of the examples that we had in the past as well, where clients want to only specialize on general IT controls, for example. So you can use COBIT processes to tailor for general IT controls only. So it's quite flexible. You can make it work. It tells you what to do. It's not telling you how to do it. So as long as you know where you're going, and when I mean where you're going, you want to understand first what your current state is as an organization. So maybe some of you have seen this before, but it's a process maturity assessment table with the processes. So I've put in the processes that, for example, you've chosen for your tranche 1 and tranche 2 activity. So priority areas in purple, and then the second priority areas on the bottom. Then anything in, so we've assessed, let's say that's a scenario where we've assessed the current state of managed service agreements and we think it's incomplete. Now, where do we want to be? Is here. We want to be at level 3. We want an established business. So you want to kind of split out, you make sure you understand where, as an organization, you're trying to head with each process so that you know how to monitor and you know how to achieve the state that you want to achieve, but also making sure you're realistic and also talking to other stakeholders within the business. For example, the client that I worked with recently had a third-party service integrator, so outsourced all IT to a third party. And that means that, okay, where does the board think we are? We are established, but actually when you speak to supplier, you're on level 1. So you want to make sure everyone is on the same page and you are realistic in your assessment, making sure that the goals are realistic as well, okay? Now that we've set up the scope and we know how we want to prioritize where we want to be, how do we start with delivery? So usually what we do at KPMG, for example, is implementing the COBIT by using risk and control matrices. So basically creating control frameworks in different raccoons. So again, depending on your scope, you may want to have one big raccoon to cover, for example, your general IT controls, or you can have 15 raccoons for each process individually. So let's say manage incident and problem management could be separate raccoons. So once you create a RACON template, and now I'm talking about COVID-5, you would need to identify control accountable people. And when I say accountable, I mean one person who is accountable for this process, because once you start talking to your organization, you're saying who is responsible for managing incidents, and then you get directed to 500 people. Accountability doesn't work like that. You need one person who is accountable for that process, right? Who would take ownership and make sure things get done. And of course, we understand there are control owners separated at each level. There would be different people, but then again, accountability must be set out very clear. So you would work, so in our example for KPMG, we worked with the client to do process walkthroughs, understanding what's the current process is, what are the controls are there, what is not there, and then also talking to suppliers, making sure that anything third parties are also involved in the process, or any other stakeholders that need to be involved. It would be specific for your organization. And then during your walkthroughs, as you interview or understand the process, you would identify the gaps. What are the gaps? What controls don't exist? They need to be there. What controls are not operated the way they should do? And then you would prioritize gaps back to your prioritization strategy. So some of the gaps may not be as important as the others. Like, for example, there's no process in place. That's a big gap. Or they don't have a policy document. That's a gap, but it can be fixed easier than creating a new process from scratch, right? So prioritizing gaps, making sure that in your initial recommendations, you would focus on the priority gaps, okay? Then once you agree the recommendations with the control accountable people, you would want to make sure that those recommendations are written out in steps, and then revise the initial RACON template that you've produced in the beginning to make sure that the results of your walkthroughs are reflected in the template and now the final document. Make sure that you align and validate everything with control owners, again, making sure that that's realistic. Do you need to include any additional steps? Do you need to exclude anything? It all works to help your organization. So you want to talk to your organization to make sure everyone's happy. And then implementation stage. Now, obviously it's not just one step. It's just like a process, but it will take a lot of effort and will require planning. So it would be, again, specific for your timeline and budget. And then once you implement the framework, you want to make sure that you monitor it and evaluate the process as you proceed, okay? So ongoing monitoring, how do we do that? There are different ways. I've just put out an example from one of my recent clients that I worked on. What we did is we set KPIs for each process to make sure that by the end of the year, let's say, we've remediated all gaps from the priority areas. And then you would report back to the board or interested stakeholders on implementation status, so split out into 4 areas: fully implemented, mostly implemented, partially in place, or not in place. And then again, you work with internal audit, control owners, and tools is a very important one here. All your companies may have different tools, whether that's ServiceNow or GRC or whichever tool you use, your own tool that you monitor, that would need to be considered in implementation of your framework. And then, of course, there are different accelerators and obstacles as you go through, some of which I've put up on the slide just from my recent experience. Alignment with internal audit, making sure if your internal audit, obviously you want to align with the other interested parties, but then if you are risk and compliance, you want to make sure you align with internal audit. After all, they will be the ones who are doing a second line review of that framework, so making sure that the steps are clear and the format is accepted. Linking the risks with a broader strategy. Sometimes it's hard to buy people on the top, so you want to make sure your prioritization strategy is linked back to the board strategy, making sure that any risks that you split out in your control frameworks actually are actually relevant for your company. And then prioritization strategy I touched on several times. You can split out controls by key, not key controls, or prioritize gaps or remediation plans by priority. Alignment with existing projects. If there are any existing initiatives that you don't want to duplicate the effort again and you want to link it back. So for example, there is already a SOC project going on, managed security will be half redundant, so you want to tie it back to existing initiatives. Some of the obstacles, third-party service integrator example that I mentioned, it's hard to speak to different stakeholders who are not on the same page. So you want to make sure everyone who needs to be involved is involved. Lack of ownership is a common one. I'm sure all of you will relate. There is a need for accountable people to be established in the very beginning of the project. That's what we find anyway. And then the cost, of course, is one of the main obstacles always, so you want to justify and rationalize what you want to do and how you want to do it. That's it for COVID 5. I'll also stick around for the questions, so I'll take any after the drinks.
Okay, so we hadn't scheduled Q&A, but one, it genuinely is an interesting topic to get our teeth into, but also I think one of my colleagues just stitched up another of the colleagues for a laugh, which is quite entertaining. Anyway, by the by, right, so what we're going to do now is, if you look on your table, you should see a piece of paper with some questions on it. Now this is only going to work, they're not complicated questions, right? This is only going to work if people engage with the debate, okay? So there are flip charts around the room, and if you'd like to use the flip charts, there's one immediately behind Ishmael, for example. So table 2, Ishmael will be able to report back in a few minutes. You've got one there. I think most tables have got a flip chart. If not, we'll draw one over. So what we'd like you to do is to reflect on these questions, which of course foolishly I didn't keep a copy for myself. Thank you, Jason. So the first question, to discuss around the table, there's no right answers, but compare and contrast, learn from your peers. So how mature is the control framework that you operate? What are the accelerators and the obstacles? Elliot spoke about some of the accelerators and obstacles in his organisation. Elsewhere where I've worked and implemented IT risk and control frameworks, he's absolutely right about business buy-in, but also business meddling. Right? Those brackets are in the wrong place. That control's not quite right, because from a good manufacturing process point of view, it needs to be like this, and making one control into 5 different controls, which actually boil down to the same thing. That was one that I've come across. But then, what are the main benefits of your IT control framework, if you've got one? And if you haven't, what do you think they might be? So those are some of the questions to ask. You've got, 10 minutes. So 3 minutes a question for the auditors amongst us, plus a minute spare to summarise. But then what would be quite helpful is decide who's going to feedback, and we'll probably take 2 or 3 tables feedback, and then maybe 1 or 2 more by exception. There will be mics. Is that okay with everybody? Any questions?
We have to do all 3 questions.
Yes, please.
Can we do it with the beer?
Can you do? I don't think the beer is quite available, but you will need it for the next session, Sarah tells me. So we'll see what we can do about the beer. Okay, over to you. 5-10 minutes, thanks. So if I come over to table 2, Ishmael, who's your spokesman?
I'll be the spokesman.
Awesome.
So we didn't do anything.
Can you? Sorry, that's fine. Oh,
so, very interesting conversation we had around our table. I mean, COVID is the focus, obviously, of this particular presentation, but there are a number of other frameworks in play as well, obviously, in the assurance field. We talked about things like the ISO family, the 27,000 family, which is relevant to IT audit. We talked about NIST, which is the US version. And in the general feeling, first of all, general feeling in terms of maturity is that while there may be pockets of optimizing maturity stage, generally the feeling is that mostly it's between the initial and you're sort of in the middle of the maturity phase. The second one is that COBIT particularly is a good enabler, a conversation starter, conversation journey with management. It takes away the locus from IT in making decisions to a more management conversation, and that's quite critical. The third one is that, in fact, the documentation and the model around COBIT is actually a great enabler. That is one of the winning points of COBIT. And then lastly, the regulatory environment is a great, shall I say, imperative in going for a good framework and actually trying to develop maturity model for a framework in IT audit. And those are the sort of things that came out of this conversation in general.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll thank you. Right, so I'll go and wander over here to this table, and would you like to share your perspectives?
Hi, my name is Vamsi. We've spent some time talking about the sort of the obstacles and accelerators in strengthening the IT control framework. I think there was largely a consensus on the table. One of the reasons for that is we all work for banks. In our view, I think the major obstacles were legacy systems. To begin with, there's a lot of disjointed systems in our organizations. And the cost is also a major obstacle because sort of implementing a good IT control framework and standardizing systems costs a fair amount of money. But at the same time, I think there have been quite a few accelerators within the industry now, primarily starting with the regulations and the focus from the regulators on tightening up the IT control environment, especially with incidents like Maersk and stuff. I think the business's risk appetite is also reducing for IT control failure. And lastly, SMR is also helping sort of get the attention onto the IT management. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Sarah, who's going to provide you with a live demo of two technologies. One is process mining and the other is near real-time analytics. So over to you.
Okay. So I hope you had a good break. I'm Sarah Pishak, and I am a data analytics specialist at KPMG. And I've heard that you guys have had a lot of data analytics presentations, so if you're bored, I hope you have a drink. But yeah, so as Andrew mentioned, I'm going to be demoing two technologies that we're using at KPMG. The first being KPMG SOFI, which is a real-time analytics, or if your system can't handle that, we can do non-real-time analytics, depending on system. And it's a monitoring platform, software as a service, and that's what you see on the screen right now. We recently did this at a global consumer goods company in the P2P process, but I will show you more focused on general IT controls. The next technology I'll show you is around business process mining and how we use it at KPMG, which we've started using in our large external audit clients about a year ago for risk assessments, and now it's just something that we use pretty much in every one that comes through. And from there, I'll show you some other dashboards that relate to that. So, first here in KPMG SOFI, I'm going to show you what we have for data quality. So, this is real time, and what this overview dashboard provides you with is an insight into data quality trends. And so down here we can see the entities and the scores per entity. And then we can see the areas, customers, materials, and suppliers. And then just trends within that. So for example, customers without shipping addresses. So if we want to dive into the customer master data section, from here you just get a snapshot of the system in real time. How many customers, one-time vendors, and blocked and deleted customers, which is particularly useful when you're trying to understand data quality. You can see things like account group and creation date, and where there's spikes. And so another trends that I'm going to dive a bit more into is around access control and access monitoring. So as part of our audits at KPMG, we find it quite important to look into access, and we review it with our external audit clients. But as the internal audit or the control owner, it's quite useful for you to have an understanding real time of what's going on in the system. So how many users there are in the system, super users, companies, and inactive users. So looking at here, this is around SOD conflicts, and it's split out by process, and then further split out into critical, high, medium, and low. So you can see real time where the conflicts are in your system. And if we go into the user cockpit, what we can figure out is we're looking at one user here in this, and all the different conflicts they have. But these dashboards allow you to understand those things that you need to take care of that are more critical than others, and those that might be, maybe save it for later. So we find it quite useful, and more our clients are looking at this sort of technology and implementing it, because it is something that we've found quite useful. So what it also does is, if you have manual controls, and it will allow you to document your testing on here. So coming in as an external auditor, from that perspective, people like KPMG can easily see the evidence that you have and the control owners have. So this is something that we're starting to implement in KPMG, and it has many different areas that we're looking at. And as I mentioned, our most recent implementation of this was purchase to pay around shopping carts, but I've chosen for tonight to just go through those two aspects that I just did around the general IT controls, and hopefully it'll be a bit more interesting to the audience. So now our process mining tool. And so what we see here is the most common way in which transactions flow through the system. And what we've seen in our auditing is that, back when I started auditing, it was very much, okay, we'll sit down with the client, we'll ask them what their process is, we'll jot it down, make a Visio, and hope and pray that this is correct. What this analysis does is it takes 100% of the data for that period and actually maps out the real process flow. So here we see from our purchase to pay analysis what the top variant is. However, we see this actually only covers 38% of the cases and is one of 655 ways in which transactions flow through the system. So, as an auditor, what you want to start to do is, and what we do with this, is we understand, so that was what our client told us and how the transactions were going through the system. But now if we look at the top three, we start seeing things like changing price, which might be an area of interest for us. Furthermore, we also see things going through from scanning an invoice back to creating an order item. So lots of different variants, and we found this very useful to really gain an understanding of how the processes actually work at clients. Furthermore, a lot of our clients that have more than one entity, we found it particularly useful to use the benchmarking analysis. So you can compare two separate entities to the group as a whole. And so for those entities that might be harder to understand what's going on, maybe a bit further afield, you can really go through this process and see exactly how people are operating, even though it might not be that close to home. And furthermore, where they're performing on average worse than the group or better. And so potentially taking insight from here. So as IT auditors, what I found really useful is previously when I would go into a client and we do, the three-way match as a configuration control and just check whether it was configured. However, now we have 100% of the transactions, And so looking through here, we can see that obviously, although this control is configured, there's a lot of ways in which transactions flow through the system that might bypass that control, and where we need extra testing. And so if we go into a screen like this, which is more of a deep dive into what you just saw, this is around invoice categorization. So if we take and remember back into that into that through-way match control, what we're seeing here in this anonymous data set is that actually the majority of transactions are flowing through the direct invoice route, which means they're bypassing that configuration control which you tested, and therefore additional work needs to be done over this population. So if we look here into a through-way match, we see it's quite a small portion of the actual document flow, and therefore we can adjust our testing as such. And furthermore, we can break down this analysis and see where company codes or perhaps vendors are performing differently. So for example, this vendor seems to have loads of three-way match, whereas some of these other ones are primarily direct invoice. So you can understand populations and call them out based on this, which we find incredibly useful. And then you can also see by period if there's any trends. And if we go back to that three-way match control that we said was effective, we now see this screen here, which is around retrospective purchase orders. So these are purchase orders raised after invoices are received. So it may have been an effective three-way match control, but if someone receives an invoice and they're raising a purchase order, also bypassing that control. So when we're looking here, we see everything in red is in that retrospective purchase order population. So if you're doing testing or investigation, you can look at this. Furthermore, if you're looking at it from an efficiency point of view or just generally fraud or anything bypassing the actual process, we find that investigating this portion is quite useful. And then you can also take it down and see by user to really gain understanding as to which sort of users that you are looking at from that. So you can see who's doing it most of the time and gain an understanding, and we find this quite useful. I mean, if you're looking from an external audit perspective at those group clients, so we can understand the entities that may be overseas that we don't have as much control over. I mean, even from when we're just looking at process efficiency and just understanding how things should work. So if we go back into our process mining, so those are subsets of it. And here what we can also look at is so if we want to talk about automation, and automation is tagged with any activity that is tagged to an end user. So if it's an end user uploading a batch job or doing something else, then that is how we identify these. So here you can see that some of these are red, which means they're mostly manual, and then there's green, which are an acceptable level of automation. Within KPMG, we generally benchmark this based on 40% and less is red, 80% and above is green. And so those are the targets that we have for automation rates. And this automation rate is particularly helpful for us in the audit space to understand where people are intervening. So you might think, the client may say that they're using invoice scanning, but here we see it's only actually 70% of the time. So what is that other population and what's happening there? So that's the main part of my presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Fabulous. It's 8 o'clock. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes to look at these questions. And the questions that we've got, hopefully on the other side of the piece of paper that should still be on your table, we've got 3 questions we'd like you to give some consideration to in your tables for discussion. So the questions here are, how extensively is data analytics used in your organisation? And that's not really just focused on audit analytics, right? Many of our clients are using data analytics, for example, in the supply chain, say. How extensively is data analytics used? Is there an imperative to do more on data analytics in your organisation? And if so, how have you gone about achieving this? And then how has data analytics, the killer question, how has data analytics improved your governance? So the power of that process mining means that you're able to say things like, I know that you think you've got one business process, but actually that's only for 25% of the transactions. And when you start to compare different entities within your organisation, if your organisation is big enough for this, of course, won't work in a startup, but if your organisation is big enough, then you can start to benchmark one organisation with another and start to see leading practice. So it's powerful stuff. Anyway, those are the 3 questions. Please discuss on your tables, and then I'll wander around with the roving mic to get feedback. Thanks. I'll try and we'll try and consult with different tables this time. So I think I'll start with this table and resist the temptation to ask Lorna to speak. Okay, so data analytics questions. This table, who is your spokeswoman? Who's your spokesperson?
We came to the conclusion we don't actually do much data analysis.
The only one who actually knows anything is...
Remarkably few people do data analytics, but we'll see what you say.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kamal Khan. I work with the London Stock Exchange, and the part of it is data surveillance, the market surveillance. So I'm new there, so I don't know a lot about it, but I know that is a routine part of our work because we have to keep track of the markets and changes. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's an imperative to do more, right, because there's a lot of it is being done. So we have to keep up with the changes. And yes, that's part of our, as I said, it's part of our routine.
Okay.
It's the data analysis.
Thank you. We've been banging on about. I'm coming to this table next, so start thinking about who's going to be speaking. So my role is in IT internal audit. I spend a lot of time talking to various different clients, a whole range of clients, not just my personal ones, about data analytics, and it's been a consistent source of amazement how little of it is done, given how powerful it can be. And we talked earlier on, I think Elliot talked about buy-in, and getting that buy-in is so hard. And when we, as a firm, talk about internal audit of the future, one of the key things that we focus on is the need for skills which go beyond technical, forgive me, nerdy skills. And I don't just mean IT nerdy, I mean, treasury specialists or financial control specialists. But a core skill, increasingly, is going to be influencing skills, and the ability to persuade our boards and our sponsors to invest in technology and to invest in better ways of doing things. Anyway, that's my take. Sorry, a bit of a rant. I can see you all just grasping for this mic, right? Okay. We've got 2 candidates now. Why don't you make a start and we'll see how we get on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hi, my name is Killian Lyons. I work as a security architect for Starling Bank, and part of our services we offer is real-time information. And so that real-time information works both ways, to the customer, but also to us. We can see a lot of information. We can see the transactions happening. So in the first part, it does provide us with a lot of information. The second question really is what we're trying to actually do with it. The imperative to do more with it, which means basically looking at ownership of the data, what different parts of the group can do with it, which would be like AML, other areas with it. And I suppose looking at the importance for the internal governance part would be looking at improving that, how we can actually see, well, the responsibility for the information, where can we actually be more proactive with it and using it and detecting things before they actually come about. So that's where I am.
Yeah. Okay, fabulous. Anything to add?
My name's Alex. I suppose talking more from a first-line perspective in terms of how data analytics being used, particularly what I see quite often is it's really helps to kind of drive decision making in a business. So firstly, kind of, where's resource going to be used? How's your budget going to be allocated? And also, particularly in terms of the resourcing side, it's if your team has got their what I'd call a book of work, whether it's for function improvement or being able to kind of just do your mandate within the business, having data analytics really helps to make sure that you focus on areas that need attention in the short and also the near term. And then also building on kind of what's been discussed about helping to drive decision making. One of the key things that I know we've spoken about on this table is say, how's it improved your internal governance? Well, one of the things you need to have in place is, the KPIs, the KRIs in place to make sure you've got those data points to be able to kind of build the business case for the various investments that you'd be looking to make. So in which case, data analytics is one of the key things that really helps to kind of build an argument, to present it to the various forms that you have to get this through in order to kind of persuade and get the budget you need for the various activities in your business.
Okay, thank you. I'll come around. So I think that's right, and thanks. And I'm going to come over to that Lynn's table over there. I'm on my way. I think that's right, and that understanding of data and that understanding of data analytics is increasingly important as we move towards the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and being able to use that handling of data to be able to build on just data analytics to move towards predictive analytics and machine learning. It's only a matter of time. Once again, who's going to speak? Well volunteered.
Myself. All right. Hello. What can I say about data analytics? I think it's very powerful as a tool. I haven't seen it in the first line of defense. I've just implemented GDPR, right, in one of the global financial institutions, and most of the work we were monitoring to see basically the progress we're making in terms of implementing the controls across the organization. We were actually maintaining a spreadsheet on a weekly basis by asking business units and corporate functions basically to provide that information. If we had a tool like this, it would have been amazing. Basically to provide real-time analysis of where you are, where you would like to be. It can be very powerful when you meet the Steerco executive team and say, here's basically our achievement so far, here's our roadmap, where we'd like to get. I think it's an amazing tool to have. I believe also in AI and machine learning. So.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's no other, we've got 3 minutes between us, right? 8:25. We've got 8 minutes between us. Talk as long as you like.
I've got 2 questions. First question.
Sarah, are you listening? Questions?
First question is, I'm doing a master's in cybersecurity, and I'm trying to make organisations better at doing their security bit. So I need some volunteers to have a look at a couple of Excel spreadsheets that allow people to judge how much a breach is going to cost them, and what are going to be the things that make the organisation better at their security generally. And if they can write down Stuart_smiles@hotmail.com, then I'd be very, very appreciative, so I can get the requisite number of people to look at it.
You got that? Stuart_smiles at hotmail.com.
And it's going to be useful, I hope.
Okay.
So the
second question?
The second question is, I think from the analytics, the piece that's of interest is Morrison's and the case. I know obviously we're in KPMG and you'd be a related party to it, but third-party liability is really where I think the cutting edge of GDPR is going to be, because at some point somebody's going to come knocking saying, I want a proportion of your money, and looking at Equifax and their experience of it, I think that's going to be more and more pertinent to sell the business message that data security is important.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to, so the question on that second point, So the question is,
how do you share the liability?
How do you share the liability? I'm not a lawyer.
Between a number of parties,
Yeah.
for a number of elements of something going on.
Okay, got it. I don't have an answer, but I understand the question. Thankfully, I'm not a lawyer. Are there any lawyers in the room before I offend lawyers? Few. Oh, one. Okay.
What you do is in every contract, you make the customer wanting their data processed to take ownership of any liability. That's what you do. That's what you do.
So.
That was my answer. It's by the contract. And at the end of the day, the CEO of the company that does the outsourcing is responsible for accountability and liability.
Just make sure you don't sign to be the controller. You're just the president.
There you go. There's your advice. Okay, so I've now got, a couple of minutes left. Okay, so I know this has been a slightly different way of doing ISACA meetings this evening, but I did check with Dalim and with Deep that whether this would be okay, and apparently it was. So I hope you found it a useful way of spending the evening, or at least half of the evening. There is still... I haven't forgotten you, Darlene. There is still some drinks at the back and some food, I think. So we'll call a halt to the KPMG. We were going to run those questions past you, but I don't think we've really got time for these. This was really to start to think about, these emerging technologies, these things that we need to think about, what's going on out there. But I'm going to flick past these, maybe think about those another time, and hand over to Dalim, who's going to go through some upcoming events. We would really genuinely welcome your feedback on this evening. Do you have a mechanism? A formal mechanism? Right, okay. So drop me an email, andrew.shefford@kpmg.co.uk. Really interested in hearing what your perspectives are on this evening. Thanks.
Okay, well, look, first of all, let's just give our thanks to Andrew, to Anel, and to Sarah for this great set of presentations. Now, in terms of what's next, yep, that's right, I think we've got it there. There are just 2 events I'm going to tell you about, which are in December. Then I'm going to tell you about some future things. And I know that we'll have other things in the pipeline for you as well. So the first one is on the 5th of December at our partner organisation, BCS North London branch. And it's about the future, the digital future, about Heathrow and what's happening there. Because there's a lot of energy being put into making this a future digital airport. Come and see and hear Dr. Brian Whitmore from Capgemini talking about this. That's on the 5th of December at BCS in Covent Garden. The one after is on the 12th of December. Yep, does that say the 12th of December? I think so. Yes. Right, and that is our next London chapter meeting. And the themes we're going through, you'll have spotted, we're going through the themes of governance, risk management, assurance, compliance, security, and so on. This one is about information security, and it features 2 presenters. One is going to be talking about information security, and the other about ISACA things, if you will. It's again at BCS Southampton Street, which is where we're having this particular ISACA meeting. And the subject that we're talking about, first of all, is called Dance Band on the Titanic, which is subtitled The Data Loss Iceberg Principle. So there's a clue. Very interesting subject. Great speaker. Richard Hollis is a internationally acclaimed ISACA speaker, as is our other speaker as well, Alan Boardman, who's not only a past president at ISACA London chapter, but also an ISACA international figure of some repute. And he's going to be giving us an ISACA update on a number of things. One of them is COBIT 2019. So you'll hear more about what Anel has been talking about today, and also our pop-up speaker, Elliot. So you'll hear more about COBIT 2019, more about CSX and the gathering portfolio of ISACA products and services around that, and about ISACA's 50th anniversary. And we've got a committee within ISACA London chapter who are already working on an ISACA day in May. It's possibly going to be in the second half of May, possibly around the 23rd of May. There are going to be some great things planned for that, and you'll hear more about that from Alan Boardman on the 12th of December. Following that, we have other things planned for 2019. This is just a very small selection of them. First of all, security at Grant Thornton on January the 8th, then compliance at EY, February the 7th, just a few steps away from here in Canary Wharf, and then March 14th, apologies, the EY one will not be at Canary Wharf, it will be at More London, EY More London, and then March 14th, PwC More London, on risk management. So those are some of the things we've got coming up. And also, just to say that information about some of our past events is being gathered on the ISACA London chapter website. So do go take a look at that. Let me just ask you something on the subject of communications and information. Who came to this event because of having seen the information in the newsletter? Okay, interestingly, nothing like everybody, but as far as the newsletters are concerned, they go out regularly. They have links to where you can register for the events and so on. Do you find them helpful in terms of the information they give, not only in London, but in other places as well? Yeah? Yes? Okay, and who would prefer them just to be London? Okay, well, judging from the yeses that I heard there, it's useful to have them not only London, but other places as well. So thank you for that feedback. Well, talking about feedback, there's some food back there, and I think it's for you. So thank you very much for coming to this event. See you next time.